Yesterday, January 16, 2025, members of the Nigeria Governors Forum and the Presidential Tax Reform Committee met to discuss reforms to Nigeria's fiscal and tax systems. They committed to modernizing outdated tax laws to enhance fiscal stability and align with global practices. The forum endorsed the new VAT distribution formula, 50% based on equality, 30% on derivation, and 20% on population. They agreed to maintain current VAT and corporate income tax rates, with exemptions for essential goods and agricultural produce to ensure economic stability. Well, joining me for more on this, I have Abiodun Kayode Alli, Senior Manager, PwC Nigeria. Thank you, Abiodun, for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Petra.
All right, it appears this conversation will just keep going on and on. But talk to us, looking at some of the submissions that the governors made yesterday, talk to us about the one that sort of stood out for you, or what your general assessment of their submissions is.
Okay, to start off with the general assessment of their submission, I think first and foremost, I'm pleased to know that we've made headway. And I think, like I've always said, it's always good to have these sort of conversations before a consensus is reached. Even if there are initial disagreements, the end result is to arrive at a result that would be favorable to all parties. So I'm glad that that has been sorted out. There are some concerns, though, with respect to some of the issues that were touched on. So ordinarily, the distribution, the allocation of the VAT, right, the sharing formula, it's a good thing that they've actually reached a consensus. The hope is that in the future, we don't have states like Rivers States, Lagos States coming up to push against who should be responsible for collecting VAT, because the proposed formula that was given by the committee was done based on the event of such eventualities, right? In case in the future we would see some governors dissatisfied and wanting to push for collecting VAT. That was why derivation was 60%. But given that it's the Nigerian Governors Forum, all governors are in agreement with this, I think to some extent that is good. Probably the amendment that would now need to be made to make it static would be in the Constitution, so that we won't have a future change. I think that's what I would say. Then I think my concerns has to do with the comments on leaving VAT at the current rates. There is more than meets the eye, because if you say leave VAT at current rates, there are some things we need to first of all specify. Understand that majority of the items consumed by the poor, the vulnerable, the average, VAT does not apply, right, for majority of what they consume. Things like rent, things like basic food items, things like education, tuition, medical services, they don't attract VAT, right, initially. So now that we are saying leave VAT at the current rate, then it means luxury items will continue to enjoy that same rate. So that's one concern. Then the second concern I then have will then be impute VAT. Because this committee, one thing they had recommended was that they were going to allow impute VAT to be claimed, right, on things that we couldn't claim them on before. Things like services, things like overhead expenses, things like capital expenditure. You would be able to claim. The proposal was that you would be able to claim impute VAT. So now that we are leaving VAT at that same rate, the question then is, would you still be able to claim impute VAT on these items, bearing in mind that if you can't claim impute VAT on these items, it might impact on the VAT that is being collected by the tax authorities as well as by the governors at the end of the day. So I think it would have been important if we made mention to some of these things. And I also think I don't know if you have any question you want to ask me at this point.
Of course, just go ahead. I'll ask you nonetheless.
Okay, then I think another point I wanted to make was the technicality of the governors. I do appreciate that the governors are having this conversation with the committee. You know, tax is not really a subject that is that simple. There is this argument on the use of the word exempt and zero rated, because the governors in that communique, they also said that they want items such as agricultural goods, basic food items to continually be exempt. the point we need to make mention of here is that those items were already exempt before the committee came up with a proposal. What the committee wanted to do was to transition them from being exempt to being zero rated. Now, zero rated is better than exempt because within exempt items, there is a possibility of having an implicit VAT. It's not clearly stated, but it's implicit. You won't know it, but it's implicit. But if you now have it zero rated, you have totally eliminated any form of implicit VAT, totally. So what the proposal is trying to do is to make most of these items, basic food items, medical services, tuition, fertilizers, agricultural seedlings, is to make it zero rated. So when the government say that they should continue to be exempt because you want to prevent the vulnerable from being exposed, that is not going to help. The word should be zero rated. So I think it's quite important that most of the governors actually understand these technicalities. And that's why it's always advisable to go with either a tax consultant or go with the head of the Internal Revenue Services who have a broader understanding of these tax terminologies.
Well, that's quite interesting. They didn't have the meeting alone. They had that committee in that meeting. So I would assume that they were made to understand one or two things. But away from that, you said a lot about some of the submissions. But I want us to go back to VAT. Yes, you're trying to make a case for increasing VAT, to 10%, then 12.5%, then 15%, and all of those things. But we know that a lot of persons have come up to say this is too much. Even some economists are saying it's a whole lot. I mean, reputable economists that we sort of love to listen to here in Nigeria saying it's too much. Why don't we wait for a while and then when things ease? Because Nigeria is going through one of the worst cost of living crises it has ever gone through. So do you think this is a good time to increase that, irrespective of whatever explanation you have for it? Another thing is the governors are hinging, some of these things they're talking about on equity, equitable distribution and all of those. And so I want you to talk to us about how equitable the proposal is to have it at 50% for, equality, 20% for derivation, and then 30% for derivation, and then 20% for population. Is that equitable?
Okay, I'll speak to the first question about the timing and with respect to inflation. So yes, I do appreciate that a lot of comments have come in from reputable economists on this matter. But one thing I would like to say is that the knowledge of tax, it requires some specialty because you need to first of all be a practicing tax consultant. You need to know what is existing currently. So once you understand what is existing currently, then you can now appreciate what the proposals are coming up with, right? So if you do increase inflation, right? So majority of the cost of inflation has to do with food, right? Food, energy cost, logistics, right? Majority of our food inflation is somewhere within the range of 40%. Majority of items that are being consumed by the poor and vulnerable, majority of their disposable income are spent on food, are spent on accommodation, are also spent on transport. So if you consider these items, VAT doesn't even apply to them, right? If you go to the local cafeteria, VAT won't apply, except you go to the more advanced restaurants. That's where you experience VAT. But if you go to the normal local canteen,
Mama Put,
you won't experience VAT. Mama Put, thank you for taking the word from my mouth. You won't experience VAT. And if you take a bus, if you enter your public transport, there is no VAT on the cost of the transport. Even the driver who is actually purchasing the fuel, right, the PMS, the diesel, the CNG, all these items don't contain VAT. Your house rent, there is no VAT. So that argument on it causing inflation might not be actually correct. I think that's where a lot of enlightenment...
Not necessarily about causing inflation, but it is insensitive to the times. I mean, that's a difference. Yeah, that's what I was trying to say.
Okay, yes. So looking at it, so the items that would now carry VAT would be a lot of items that are not, that you won't expect to be consumed by the vulnerable. The only item that I think might be consumed by the vulnerable will be items like phone calls, right? Because those telecom services will still carry VAT. I think those are just the items, but it's not your everyday man who would always be recharging his credit. So that's my thought on that. But I do understand the sensitivity, especially when it comes to those who can now afford some of the items that will carry on VAT. I do understand. But one thing we should also consider is that there is a lot of escape routes that has been given, such that, like I said, most items you can now claim input VAT. The producers can now claim input VAT. So the producers also need to understand, and I'm sure they do understand, that since their costs are reduced, they should also give consideration to how much they would be charging their consumers. So it's more of a mix. And I think the important thing is to have a thorough understanding. But it's okay to give people time to begin to assimilate these things. And maybe over time, this issue can be revisited. So I think that's fine from that perspective. I think the concern then would then be, because I said it's a mix, the concern then would be, are the governors, the government, are they happy to go with a lower VAT collection? And don't forget, like I said earlier, there has been an increase in the target set by the tax authorities with respect to collection this year. So are they happy to go with something lower? If they are fine with that, then that's fine. Then for the company's income tax also, retaining it at 30%, I think my concern there would be that there might be a need to revisit what are the people who constitute small companies and not small companies. What we have currently, we have companies that are classified as small, medium-sized, and large. The proposal is to make us have just small companies and companies that are not small. And those small companies, their threshold has now been increased from 25 million to 50 million. So now that they are going to be regarded as small, if they're making 50 million and below, they won't pay tax. But if you now have companies earning something higher than 50 million, they will pay tax. And if they pay tax, the rate would be 30%, right? So I don't know. I think this is something that the committee would want to look at and discuss with the government also. Then with respect to the allocation.
Okay, so can we do this in less than 30 seconds? Because, I mean, my director tells me I need to get out of this place.
Okay, I'll try to do it as fast as possible. Then in terms of equality, I do think, yeah, equality, 50%, everyone getting a fair share. I think it's okay. I guess the state governors now have to stand in, and I want to believe they've agreed to be their brother's keeper, right? In terms that if you look at it in terms of consumption, if more consumption is taking place in one particular area, and whatever you collect in that area, you are willing to give 50% to you're going to give 50% to other areas where they don't have as much as consumption. I think it's
all right. Abiodun, I guess we'll have this conversation some other time. We need to go now. Thank you so much for your thoughts on Business Edge today.